and of household management, wealth. In many instances, several such pursuits are grouped together under a single capacity. The art of bridle making, for example, and everything else pertaining to the equipment of a horse are grouped together under horsemanship. Horsemanship, in turn, along with every other military action, is grouped together under strategy. And other pursuits are grouped together under other capacities. In all these cases, the ends of the master sciences are preferable to the ends of the subordinate sciences, since the latter are pursued for the sake of the former. This is true whether the ends of the actions lie in the activities themselves, or, as is the case of the disciplines just mentioned, in something beyond the activities.
Okay. What do you think is going on here? What are these many activities, the arts and the sciences that he is referring to? And with that, the notion of ends. What is he saying? What would be his very preliminary analysis of ends or telos? Right? What do you think he's saying?
Well, some of the aim for good. As Lauren had said earlier, maybe there's a hierarchy. There's some activities more important than other activities, and some products more important than others. Kind of building up to the master, the master activity, and that's more important than the subordinate activities.
So what is the master science? So of course, okay, he talks about different activities having different ends, right? For medicine, the end is health, of shipbuilding, a vessel, of strategy, victory, and of household management, wealth, right? So these are different activities, they have different ends, right? And he is what is he trying to do with these examples? Why is he giving us these examples? What is he trying to get at?
Is it the ultimate goal? Like the hierarchy, as people have mentioned, they're all of them, if you keep going to its roots, they're all leading to the same ultimate goal, which is happiness.
You're jumping way ahead. But yes, so he talks about these different kinds of ends. There are different divisions of ends, but the problem really is, and that's where he ended his first paragraph, is again the unification, right? So how do you unify these ends into something that's a whole, right? So what is it, under what umbrella do you make sense of these different ends of different human activities? How do you unify them? So there's a plurality of actions, plurality of the arts and sciences also entails a corresponding plurality of ends, right? But what is it that you can do to actually unify them into a whole? Right, so that's where so the sentence becomes the key when he says that in all these cases, the ends of the master sciences are preferable to the ends of the subordinate sciences, since the latter are pursued for the sake of the former. And the former is the master science, right? So this is true whether the ends of the actions lie in the activities themselves, or, as is the case in the disciplines just mentioned, in something beyond the activities. So then the question that emerges for us is that what are the master sciences?
Well, in a way, saying the point of bridle making is victory. Right? Because once you follow the train all the way through to the end, he arrives at victory as the point, and probably good beyond that, but you might be making a bridle, but you're doing a whole lot more. So you're aiming at something much bigger than just making a bridle.
Okay. Okay. Yes. So something much bigger. Exactly. So but then I could say, I could ask you, okay, so, but what is that bigger? Right? So still it's, so he's kind of giving us a clue. He's sort of intimating at something, but it's not defined here yet, right? So we still have to know what the master science is, right? Something that is bigger, something that is a whole, something that contains all these different parts and then
Bigger yet
becomes.
than even victory. Sorry, I don't know.
No, go on. Sorry, what were you saying?
If it's something bigger yet than even victory, or master science beyond that.
So it seems like that Aristotle is in search of a single capacity or a single whole or a single notion under which we can make sense of all of these different multiple ends or telos, right? And we still don't know what that is. What is that unifying principle or a comprehensive whole? And so we have to kind of carry on. Okay. So the title of the second chapter, Politics as the Master Science of the Good. Right? So we now need to know what politics is. What does this term mean for Aristotle? It's certainly not politics as we understand it today, but politics, and I think we should read the footnote. Would somebody like to read the footnote? Politicae. Jason, since you are kind of really in front of me, would you like to read the footnote?
Sure. Politicae is the science of the city-state, the polis and its members, not merely in our narrow political sense of the word, but also in the sense that a civilized human existence is, according to Plato and Aristotle, only possible in the polis. Thus, politicae involves not only the science of the state, politics, but our concept of society as well.
So that's very clarifying. So what do you understand by politics, according to Aristotle, and as explained by this footnote?
You said what it means to live in a civilization. Which is for them pretty much the same thing.
Okay, well,
we live together.
Yes. Well, what is so polis, what is the polis? And how do you think it is different or not different from our society? What did it mean for the Greeks to be a meaningful member of the polis? What did they fear the most?
Being an outcast.
Yes, exactly.
Ostracized.
That was a fate worse than death, right? So that meant in order to stay in the polis, you have to abide by its rules, right? You have to abide by its laws. And what Aristotle is saying, so there is a science of the city-state. So politics is kind of a political science, if you will, or is like a set of rules and laws which citizens of the city-state have to know so that they can be meaningful members of the polis, right? And if you're not that, and if you do something which is against the laws, then yeah, you will be an outcast. You will be ostracized. And that's not what any Greek would like to be.
as partly defined last term by the Credo.
Yes,
Move along.
exactly. Yes, and also in the apology.
Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, the Credo, you're right, that Socrates decides to stay and die. That is more meaningful for him than to be ostracized. Then he would be a nobody. Right? We don't have that fear. You know? So it's different. So it's a little different, or it's quite different.
Although I think there are people who would never leave New York or San Francisco.
Oh, really? You think so? But people have been pushed out.
Yeah, but yeah, pushed out. It almost feel the same thing. Not everyone, not every place, but New Yorkers.
Yes, those New Yorkers. Okay, so let's read the opening paragraph of chapter 2. Norman, would you like to continue? Yeah.
Yes. Now, if there exists an end in the realm of action which we desire for its own sake, an end which determines all our other desires, if, in other words, we do not make all our choices for the sake of something else, for in this way the process will go on infinitely so that our desire would be futile and pointless, then obviously this end will be the good that is the highest good. Will not the knowledge of this good, consequently, be very important to our lives? Would it not better equip us, like archers who have a target to aim at, to hit the proper mark? If so, we must try to comprehend, in outline at least, what this good is and to which branch of knowledge or to which capacity it belongs.
Yes, excellent.
Yeah.
Okay, so he's taking us just an inch further here. What do you think he's on about?
Sounds as if he's trying to integrate all the ends into something that they all fit in as a kind of universal good.
Mm-hmm. Okay,
And if such a good exists, we should know what it is and how, therefore, to aim for it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. When he says, will not the knowledge of this good consequently be very important to our lives, would it not better equip us, like archers who have a target to aim at, to hit the proper mark? If so, we must try to comprehend in outline, I think this is a key moment, in outline, at least what this good is and to which branch of knowledge or to which capacity it belongs. So there is something, as we know, as he's saying, there's something called the good. We should at least develop an outline. There should be an outline or structure to make sense of what that is. But most importantly, we need to figure out which branch of knowledge does this notion belong. Right? Or like which part of the sciences does this notion belong? Any thoughts or any questions on this? Further comments?
Almost a sense, you need to read this book.
Yes.
Or if he's walking around, you need to take my course. If you want to find out.
Exactly. Right. That's right. He hasn't confirmed anything for us yet.
Yeah.
You know, he hasn't confirmed what the ends are. He doesn't really confirm what the good is. He hasn't really confirmed even which branch of science does this belong, right? He's still setting up the problem,
Yeah.
right?
There's a target, even if we don't know yet what it is.
Yes.
Here it is.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, that's exactly right. So we still need to figure out quite a bit in order to make complete sense of his argument, right? Okay, so who is our next reader? Who would like to read the second paragraph? Because I think that's where we make some progress.
I will if you want.
Okay, please, James. Yes, great.
Starting with this good.
Mm-hmm.
This good, one should think, belongs to the most sovereign and most comprehensive master science, and politics clearly fits this description. For it determines which sciences ought to exist in states, what kind of sciences each group of citizens must learn, and what degree of proficiency each must attain. We observe further that the most honored capacities such as strategy, household management, and oratory are contained in politics. Since this science uses the rest of the sciences, and since, moreover, it legislates what people are to do and what they are not to do, its end seems to embrace the ends of the other sciences. Thus it follows that the end of politics is the good for man. For even if the good is the same for the individual and the state, the good of the state clearly is the greater and more perfect thing to attain and to safeguard. The attainment of the good for one man alone is, to be sure, a source of satisfaction, yet to secure it for a nation and for states is nobler and more divine. In short, these are the aims of our investigation, which is in a sense an investigation of social and political matters.
Yes, brilliant. So yeah, what do you think of this? He's making a very bold claim here as well. Sort of putting up front the relationship of society and individual, if you will, of citizens and the city-state, you know, and the good of the city-state and of the individual. What is the relationship between the two?
Well, the good of the city-state is definitely superior to one man.
Mm-hmm. And why is he saying that? What does he mean by that?
As a foundation for ethics, I think a great deal. So that what should drive our actions question, well, it's the good of the state.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's not only one person.
Why the good of the state is nobler and more divine, you know, it's so far superior. And he says, well, you know, the attainment of the good for one man alone is, to be sure, a source of satisfaction, you know, it's fine. But that of the state is nobler and divine, in which individuals also live and satisfy their ends and their goals. So what is the point? We kind of touched on it when we started this chapter and when we discussed the polis and the relationship with the individuals in the polis. What is the benefit to individuals when the goals or the good of the state is divine and nobler than just individual satisfaction?
Individuals are means to the attainment of the state. So he usually looks at things not when he talks about ends and about the good. When he talks about the good, he usually makes the point that certain things are means to the ends, means to the good.
Mm-hmm.
The good. So for example, the more people that, members of the state that achieve the good, it helps the state attain even the nobler good, which is of all. There's something about the means to something and the end of something that he's always talking about. And so a person in a state is, if he can become good, but he's a means to the whole state to become, he says,
nobler and
more
divine.
divine.
What do you think? What do other people think of what Chris just said? Means and ends relationship, and individuals as a form of means to the ends of the state. What do you think of this idea? And do you think this is what Aristotle is also trying to say?
I feel like he's saying that encompasses the most is the greatest good. And so certain forms of science which encompass lesser forms are the greater good or the spirit, just as that which satisfies the state encompasses the individuals within the state, and therefore it is farther out on that hierarchy of what is more important, what is closer to bringing us to the good.
Okay. Yes. Okay. I think, yes, that works. I think that works for Aristotle, because polis then, once it is in existence and once it has its citizens living in there and involved in different activities or multiple activities, polis becomes more than the sum of its parts, right? And so then it becomes in the interest of the individuals to correspond also with the goals, the nobler ends of the polis. Because if they don't, then we just talked about they'll become ostracized, right? So the point is, the polis is more divine, the city-state is more nobler, and it is in that formation that its individuals or its citizens also actualize themselves, that they also realize their goals, that they also realize their highest ends, their highest purposive aim, right? Without the polis, they're nothing, right?
Is that the same as saying that it's, well, I think Jason implied this earlier, but it's hard to imagine ethics without imagining how you interact with other people. So it's difficult for me to think about ethics or good without imagining it in a social context. From that point of view, this makes a lot of sense to me. I have to admit that assuming that the polis legislates necessarily for the good what people are to do makes me a little uncomfortable.
And say more, why?
Well,
what makes you uncomfortable?
The 20th century.
Yeah, the 20th century is different. The 20th century is just a different animal. It's difficult to compare it to the Greek city-states. But
well, you asked.
Because, you know, we have different rules and we have different laws. We have a society, you know, like I think it is Martin Oswald who says that the word society doesn't even exist in Greek. You know, there was no society, there was just city-states. So it's only in modernity that society comes into being. And so it brings its own laws, its own regulations. So we are different from the ancients. They had a very different set of rules. They had a different sense of what gave meaning to their lives, which we actually don't share with them. But Aristotle here is making a very radical point Or a point, that also is made by Plato in his dialogues. And we see that actually at play when Norman brought up Crito, that it is the polis, that's superior. And one realizes their goals within the polis, like it or not. If you don't abide by its rules, you'll be ostracized and you won't mean anything, right? And that's why Socrates chooses to die, because that was more meaningful to him than to leave the city. And so this is exactly the point here, which is that it is the polis whose goals are superior in the end, are more divine. And it is through the polis that also its individuals can realize what is good for them, like what their goals are, right? You cannot realize your goals if you're living as an ostracized member or, somewhere out of the city state. You won't be able to achieve the highest good. You cannot live a good life. You need the polis to realize a good life for yourself. Right? So the polis, or politics, that is the master science. That is the branch of knowledge to which the good belongs. Right? It is under that knowledge or science that Aristotle is going to explain what the good is. Yes?
Individual, I can only make bridles. I can't achieve glorious victory over my enemies. Only through the polis can I do that. I just make bridles which contribute to horsemanship, which contribute to strategy.
That's right. That's absolutely right. Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And also, people were born in different castes. If you were born a slave, you're born a slave. You couldn't become anything else. So, right, it is within that, to us, it would seem confined. Maybe it didn't seem that way to the Greeks or to the different groups, social groups in the polis, but, it is within the confines of your own caste or social group that you had to figure out what the good was, or how you could live a good life, Maybe it was a question that wasn't really asked of the subordinate groups or the slaves. This was only a question for the aristocrats who actually went to the Lyceum, who read.
I appreciate you're talking about that, because I was about to ask that question.
Yeah, you can still ask your question.
Well, just whether Aristotle would believe that this applied to a slave.
No, I don't think so. I think this is only for the educated, the literati, and those were very few, fortunate people who led society. They were the rulers, they were the governors, they were the administrators, and so they were supposed to understand, what ethics were. It's like recall what you read in the Meno. Meno comes to see Socrates and asks him the question, can virtue be taught? And he wanted to know that question, why? The answer to the question, why? So that he could rule well, manage well, right? That was his concern. Was a typical aristocrat, He just wanted to know if he could teach virtue to his people, to other governors, to other rulers, other administrators of his city-state, so that they could rule well, they could manage well, right? Any thoughts or questions at this point? Shall we read on?
Sure.
Yeah. Okay, Bill, do you want to start the third chapter, The Limits of Ethics and Politics?
Sure, thank you.
Mhm.
Our discussion will be adequate if it achieves clarity within the limits of the subject matter. For precision cannot be expected in the treatment of all subjects alike, any more than it can be expected in all manufactured articles. Problems of what is noble and just, which politics examines, present so much variety and irregularity that some people believe that they exist only by convention and not by nature. The problem of the good, too, presents a similar kind of irregularity because in many cases, good things bring harmful results. There are instances of men ruined by wealth and others by courage. Therefore, in a discussion of such subjects, which has to start from a basis of this kind, we must be satisfied to indicate the truth with a rough and general sketch. When the subject and the basis of a discussion consist of matters that hold good only as a general rule, but not always, the conclusions reached must be of the same order. The various points that are made must be received in the same spirit. For a well-schooled man is one who searches for that degree of precision in each kind of study which the nature of the subject at hand admits. It is obviously just as foolish to accept arguments of probability from a mathematician as to demand strict demonstrations from an orator.
Okay, let's pause here. Okay, so I'd like to gather some thoughts about what you think is going on. Now he's moving slowly, he's taking little steps. Where do you think he is in the argument? Let's focus on this sentence here. Problems of what is noble and just, which politics examines, present so much variety and irregularity that some people believe that they exist only by convention and not by nature. The problem of the good, too, presents a similar kind of irregularity because in many cases, good things bring harmful results. What do you think he is on about here with the notion of the human good?
I thought of him going back to our talks about Socrates, what is good, that kind of endless circular discussion. And if we get into that, we'll never get anywhere. So that, hey, there's a lot of variation, variability, irregularity. If we go down all these little rat holes, we'll never, we may not get any further in this discussion, except that limitation, really.
That's right. Yes, exactly. That there are so many opinions, right? There are so many ideas, opinions, rituals, practices, that, we may not get anywhere. That's exactly right. Yes. What do you think? Do you agree with what James just said? Anybody wants to add something?
I go back to that. I think he said the outline. He used an outline way back.
Yes.
And say if you try, I think your rabbit hole comment was right, perhaps, where you try to pin it down to a mathematical definition, exact, perfectly provable thing, you won't ever prove it. However, we can get to something of a truth by, there is a nature to what is good. It's not just convention. And as long as we're okay with an outline and not a proof, I think we'll be on the right track.
Right. So what he is saying, that something what is noble and just are by convention. Right. So something that is good is maybe good to a particular subject, maybe good in a particular circumstance, and may not work in a different situation, in a different context. Right? So he is raising that as an issue, as an idea. Okay. Then also here, and towards the end of the paragraph, and it actually is more fleshed out in the following paragraph, there's a question of audience. What is or who is Aristotle's audience? Right, and that goes back actually to what we were just talking about. You know, who is he writing this for? Who is reading this text? Who is really thinking about the question of the good, the question of the ethics? And he has some interesting things to say about that. Right, so he's leading us there. So he has raised, you know, the question of the good, and it varies. It is set by convention. It varies. It's irregular. And he said something to the effect that, but you know, there is a unifying conception. So we have to still figure that out, how he gets there. And so he's now taking, you know, a little bit of a different direction. He's taking us in a different direction. And he's kind of raising this issue about, you know, what does he say about the youth? You know, who is actually the right audience for this question, for the theory of the ethics? So, well, Jason, do you want to read the following passage? Each man can judge.
Each man can judge competently the things he knows, and of these he is a good judge. Accordingly, a good judge in each particular field is one who has been trained in it, and a good judge in general, a man who has received an all-round schooling. For that reason, a young man is not equipped to be a student of politics, for he has no experience in the actions which life demands of him, and these actions form the basis and subject matter of the discussion. Moreover, since he follows his emotions, his study will be pointless and unprofitable, for the end of this kind of study is not knowledge, but action. When he is young, whether he is young in years or immature in character makes no difference, for his deficiency is not a matter of time, but of living and of pursuing all his interests under the influence of his emotions. Knowledge brings no benefit to this kind of person, just as it brings none to the morally weak. But those who regulate their desires and actions by a rational principle will benefit greatly benefit from a knowledge of this subject. So much by way of a preface about the student, the limitations which have to be accepted, and the objective before us.
So, who would be a good student in Aristotle's eyes? He seems a very strict teacher, huh?
I'm too young to understand.
Yes, you're too young, right? Yeah, he doesn't like the youth, which is very kind of contrary to Socrates, I thought. Because Socrates is kind of teaching the youth, he's arguing with them, he's questioning them. And Aristotle has, I don't know, a different, I don't know, do you agree? Do you think there's some kind of a difference? But yeah, who would be a good student in Aristotle's view? Why does he reject the youth? What is his critique of the youth? Let's put it that way.
Lack of experience.
Lack of experience, that's one strike against them, and there is another strike against them. What is
Follows his
that?
emotions. Emotional, follows his emotions.
Yes.
So not
Immature.
Immature, yes. Don't have life experience. And they react to their feelings, to their emotions. So, what is the opposite of that?
An accomplished person, a professor, politician, someone, even person of commerce, that just a well-accomplished person, fairly well-to-do, I would think. Sort of the upper middle, upper class person, not a tradesman or a wage worker or a slave or a young person.
Mm-hmm. But then, so note, so he kind of first berates the youth. And then in line 7 on page 6, he says, whether he is young in years or immature in character makes no difference. Now, he's now going against what he just said. For his deficiency is not a matter of time, but of living and of pursuing all his interests under the influence of his emotions. Knowledge brings no benefit to this kind of person, just as it brings none to the morally weak. But those who regulate their desires and actions by a rational principle will greatly benefit from a knowledge of this subject. So,
Philosophers, educated people.
But anybody who possesses a rational principle, logos, right? Anybody who has the ability to discuss, to make an argument, to be rational, that person, and that person can be young, that person can be old, but it is that person. What you need is logos. If you have that, then you're in a good position, right? Then you can be part of this project of ethics. Yes, does that make sense?
That he's saying, though, in order to acquire this logos or this knowledge, you have to kind of follow your emotions while you're young. So it's not just the act of being old, it's the act of living through all of this that gives you the ability to.
Yes, that's right. Exactly. It's like how consciously are you acting as an individual in the world, right? What kind of rational capabilities or faculties are you able to cultivate in order to be a good member, a useful member of the city-state, right? So it is, I mean, he doesn't really, it's interesting here because if you've read the Poetics, Aristotle has a very interesting point about emotions there, especially when he talks about catharsis. Does anybody recall that? You know, when he says that you go see a tragedy, you reach a cathartic moment, you know, and you're very emotional, right? But it is in that cathartic moment that you reconstitute yourself. You work out something emotionally that is actually rational, right? In that moment, you come to a higher self-understanding of who you are and the world that you inhabit, right? So I don't think he completely, he doesn't, I don't think he opposes emotions. I think he makes an argument for emotional intelligence. But here he's making a different point. So I just want us to be aware that it is not just one or the other, but rather here is just a different point of rationality, rational principle that characterizes a good student. Yes, any questions? Any rebuttals? How's it going? You think we're making some progress with Aristotle?
Yes.
Yes.
Good.
It takes thinking and rationality,
Mm-hmm.
which you can learn to do.
Yes.
5-year-olds don't have it.
Yes, you're not born with it.
No, and probably not teenagers.
Probably. Yes, probably not.
Tia, sort of thinking back to the prior one,
Yes.
it just seemed to me that Aristotle was, I don't know, more ready to sort of proceed step by step and to take, as opposed to Socrates, who seemed to want to define every little thing along the way. Is that on target?
Yes, that's right. So this is a very different mode of presentation of an argument than Socrates. So Socrates, well, we have read Plato, right, who is rendering Socrates coherent in the form of dialogues. So it's the mode of presentation there is very different, right? So the dialogue and the questioning is making the argument, right? And it goes, sometimes you just feel like Socrates is just going about it in a very circuitous way. The way he talks about virtue is just, you know, why doesn't he just tell us? He comes close to telling us, but then he retracts, you know. So this, I would say, is more like a treatise. It's not a dialogue for sure. So it's like a philosophical treatise that Aristotle is elaborating. So it's very different. And so, yeah, it has a different method. It's very methodical, and unlike Socrates, yeah.
I mean, I think one clear thing, difference, he knows exactly where he's going.
Yes.
He goes along with him as clearly as he can, but he knows where he's going.
Yes, that is right. He knows where he's going because it's evident from the way he starts,
yeah.
Right? The first two sentences kind of lay it out and pique our curiosity. Oh, okay. You know, there's an end, there's a highest good. So what is it? So you want to read on.
Now, he's had to think through this at some point.
Oh, sure. Yes.
This is the end result, not the struggle.
That's right. We had to do a lot of thinking. I mean, he was a student of Plato, and, you know, and we will see that how he is part of that project and also not part of that project. Like Aristotelian project is something different, right? It's a different advance on philosophy or philosophical inquiry.
We are still looking for the good.
We are. That's right.
At least this one. I mean, obviously, he's also, from my knowledge, looking at all kinds of other stuff.
Yes. Yeah.
But,
and then he kind of, he tells us in the next chapter sort of what the broad outlines of this good are. Yes. Okay. So Norman, would you like to, let's read further. Start chapter 4 and let's read the first paragraph.
To resume the discussion, since all knowledge and every choice is directed towards some good, let us discuss what is in our view the aim of politics, that is, the highest good attainable by action. As far as its name is concerned, most people would probably agree, for both the common run of people and cultivated men call it happiness and understand by being happy the same as living well and doing well. But when it comes to defining what happiness is, they disagree. And the account given by the common run differs from that of the philosophers. The former say it is some clear and obvious good, such as pleasure, wealth, or honor. Some say it is one thing and others another. And often the very same person identifies it with different things at different times. When he is sick, he thinks it is health. And when he is poor, he says it is wealth. And when people are conscious of their own ignorance, they admire those who talk above their heads in accents of greatness. Some thinkers used to believe that there exists over and above these many goods, another good, good in itself and by itself, which also is the cause of good in all these things. An examination of all the different opinions would perhaps be a little pointless, and it is sufficient to concentrate on those which are most in evidence or which seem to make some sort of sense.
Okay. So, Norman, what do you think?
Okay, lots of things we need. We need to think through it to find something at the end that makes sense out of all of these goods, which gets connected with philosophers here. Something higher than most people are going to come up with. And I think, I mean, when you're sick, you want health, but in an ordinary run of things, there are higher goods than that. Family, but there's still more than that. Is there, I mean, he sort of runs around the idea of a good in itself.
Yes.
Some thinkers used to believe a good in itself. But what we're apparently on our way to look at is some of the different opinions, but not all of them.
Right, right. This is like a good prelude to what he's going to say about Plato, right? Yeah. Because Plato talked about the good, right? So basically, he is invoking here to implicitly right now, but that's where he's going to go. Yeah. And then he's going to develop, as we know, a critique of Plato. Yes. But Plato was the one who also theorized the notion of the good, right? And Aristotle is going to take issue with that, you know, good as such, good in itself, good by itself, you know. So, and actually, if we read the second passage, it's going to become evident that that's where he's going. So, yeah, he's just taking an issue with Plato.
Right.
Okay. Okay. Bill, do you want to read the following paragraph?
Sure. Nor must we overlook.
Yes.
Nor must we overlook the fact that arguments which proceed from fundamental principles are different from arguments that lead up to them. Plato, too, rightly recognized this as a problem and used to ask whether the discussion was proceeding from or leading up to fundamental principles, just as in a race course, there is a difference between running from the judges to the far end of the track and running back again. Now we must start with the known. But this term has two connotations, what is known to us and what is known pure and simple. Therefore, we should start perhaps from what is known to us. For that reason, to be a competent student of what is right and just, and of politics generally, one must first have received a proper upbringing in moral conduct. The acceptance of a fact as a fact is the starting point, and if this is sufficiently clear, there will be no further need to ask why it is so. A man with this kind of background has or can easily acquire the foundations from which he must act. He must start. But if he neither has nor can acquire them, then let him lend an ear to Hesiod's words. That man is all best who himself works out every problem. That man too is admirable who follows one who speaks well. He who cannot see the truth for himself, nor, hearing it from others, store it away in his mind, that man is utterly useless.
It's pretty excellent. Right. So let's see. What does he mean when he say, Plato too rightly recognized this as a problem and used to ask whether the discussion was proceeding from or leading up to fundamental principles. Just as in a race course, there's a difference between running from the judges to the far end of the track and running back again. What do you think is going on in this sentence? Is he praising Plato, perhaps? And why?
At least it's the same general issue.
Mm-hmm.
Plato has certainly gotten above all these little specific goods.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
So is interested in if there is something broader
Mm-hmm.
and more general.
Mm-hmm.
And we're obviously going to get somewhat in that direction,
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
if differently. But
Mm-hmm.
again, do you start with a main point,
Uh-huh.
or do you build up to it?
Yes. Uh-huh.
Do you look at the evidence and put the evidence together
Mm-hmm.
and perhaps conclude from that
Mm-hmm.
rather than
Yes, right. So in a way, he's admiring Plato for being well perplexed, if you will.
Yeah.
You know, about whether the proper way of proceeding is to begin from or lead to the principles. Does that make sense? And that's why the analogy of this, the racetrack, the racers running away and then coming back is like, you start with the principle or do you lead to the principle, right? So that's the tension that he thinks that Plato also wrestled with. And he thinks that was a good, productive tension that Plato wrestled with. So at stake is the issue of how to know, right? So how to know what is good, which is also pretty Socratic, right? Socrates, what did he's famous for? How I know what I don't know, right? How do you know what you don't know, right? Or, you know, with Meno, he goes down this rabbit hole on about what is virtue, right? Does anybody recall how he kind of closes the circle? Plato, I mean, closes the circle about knowing or knowability.
Kind of the answer. You just said,
Sorry, your voice was breaking up. I couldn't hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
As I recall, he kind of punts on the issue in that he just calls it a gift of the gods, so it's neither innate in you nor something you acquire, but it just granted.
Yes, that's right. Or he actually elaborated at length. I mean, you're right. You're absolutely right. It's the theory of recollection, right? If you recall, then you can gather knowledge. You can access knowledge, right? But Aristotle, I think, has a more, maybe it's a different analysis, more of a sober analysis, because what does he say then? He says, now we must start with the known, but this term has two connotations. What is known to us and what is known, pure and simple. Therefore, we should start perhaps from what is known to us. For that reason, to be a competent student of what is right and just and of politics generally, one must first have received a proper upbringing in moral conduct. How do you think that this thought differs from what we were just talking about? Plato's view or Socratic theory of recollection. How is Aristotle actually different? He has a, you know, what is he saying about knowability?
Got to have a start. I mean, this is how we were brought up as a child. How are we thinking? We've eliminated a lot of people.
Sorry, what did you say?
We've eliminated a lot of people.
What do you mean by that?
I would assume he's thinking that, again, it's going to be the citizen upper class that has the proper upbringing in moral conduct, as opposed to the son of a vase maker who learns how to make vases. Rather than, I mean, certainly one would hope a sense of morals in terms of the business and how to lead a life. But Aristotle seems to assume here you've got to be brought up properly.
Mm-hmm.
Probably means the upper class who had the time to do that, and who then can have a good teacher.
Okay. What do other people think? Do you agree with Thorman's interpretation or disagree?
It does. I mean, I agree that Aristotle seems to have a pretty high bar for where you start from if you're going to have any chance of success. And what that makes me wonder is you know, does he assume you sort of already have the answer if you've had the right upbringing and moral conduct, which is I couldn't help but wonder.
A good question. Actually, that's a very good question. Like, if you have a good upbringing and a moral conduct, then does that mean you know? Like, you know what you want to know? That's a good question. Others? Lauren, do you have any thoughts?
Well, it just doesn't seem to leave much room for growth and acquisition of knowledge or acquisition of what is known. It seems to just, you know, stall where, you know, you're there or you're not there, but there's no opportunity for growth and acquisition.
Why do you say that?
Well, you know, what's been said before. You have, you know, to be a competent student of what is right and just, one must first have received a proper upbringing, and it just rules out anyone who hasn't. And anyone who has innate intelligence, it seems, is still who at least by our belief system, would be capable of learning and acquiring this kind of knowledge. It just doesn't seem like he allows much room for that.
Okay. I would say we should actually wait and see what Aristotle, when he talks about action and activity, that's where I think there is room.
Okay.
And so perhaps we have to kind of wait and see where he takes us, because it seems what he's going to say, what he is arguing for, is that that ethics are possible on the basis of action. And in that sense, it's the activity, it's the mode of action that takes over the domain of knowledge. You know, so although there is some interaction, of course, between the two, but it would seem, I think that's where he's heading, that he's going to grant some primacy to activity. And it is through your action that you are able to acquire a good moral conduct and, you know, the highest good. So something to keep in mind as we read further. But good questions, good points. Any other points before we?
Well, the word foundations jumped out at me. So, you know, in order to build a beautiful house, you got to start with a foundation. Now, having one doesn't necessarily guarantee that you'll get there, but it's you can't not have one in order to get the beautiful house in the end. So he's suggesting that you have to have a good upbringing and moral conduct in order to even be able to talk about building from there.
Sure, sure, he does. But also, so now actually, we do have a few pieces on the table. He talked about the rational principle, right? So that's where he actually was contending with the idea that you just have to be older, wiser to have that. But he thinks that anybody can have logos or the rational principle to be in the world, right? So if you have that, and if you have the foundations, if you are educated, if you are emotionally smart, intelligent, self-aware, then, I think that's pretty good. That actually says something about your moral conduct, right?
I picked up something else in that phrase too. The acceptance of a fact as a fact.
Where is this that you're reading? Sorry.
It's right after the proper upbringing and moral conduct.
Yes, yes.
I mean, a basic rational kind of thing. Fact is a fact, and we can argue and rationalize and think about it with facts. But if we won't accept a fact as a fact,
right,
we can go anywhere else.
Right. Yes. Yes. Right. So that's where he's saying that, there's something that is known to us. Things we internalize, things we come to know, right? And sometimes there are circumstances and different moments that make us aware of what that really is, right? It's also something, well, Socrates was talking about that, when Jason, you were saying, well, you're born with it. You may not know that you're born with it, but when you recall, you become aware of it, right? So when Aristotle says, what is known to us, the term has two meanings: what is known to us and what is known, pure and simple. So he is assuming that there is knowledge out there. It is for us to attain it, right? But he hasn't really talked about how you can attain it yet. Right? He's assuming it's out there. It is for us to figure out. And so that's where, Lauren, when I was speaking to your point, is that, so how do you get there? He's going to then elaborate that, well, it is through your activity, through your action, that you can get to that form of knowledge, or you can recognize what you know. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense, and I agree. Lauren, had a key point about the hierarchy, and I think that part of that hierarchy to the greater good is you have to be self-sufficient before you can go on. I mean, that's a lesser good, but healthy, has means of support. Those are goods, but they're lesser goods for wherever he's taking us. So you're going to have to be, that citizen of the polis, when you're going to have that education. You're going to have the means, to get wherever, to be the best you can be, basically, what Aristotle, to that end.
That's
so
right.
I think the hierarchy is really important.
Yes.
And I'm noticing that hierarchy in the Hesiod.
Yes. You want to say more about Hesiod?
Okay.
I think, yeah.
The best person is the one who works every problem out for himself.
That's right.
Who can think through it.
Uh-huh.
But if you can't do that, follow a teacher.
Yes.
I mean, not just a fancy talker, but one who can present material and show it to you, so you can help you work it out, perhaps. But if you can't see the truth for yourself, or you can't hear it from anybody else, and sort of way, that's a useless person. And that's storing in a way. I mean, what you learn from teacher is in a weird way another version of the recollection, except it's historical. It's real. It's what's brought from somebody else, who got it from somebody else, who got it from somebody else, not some mystic thing in your brain.
That's very interesting. Yes. That's absolutely right. Yeah. So there are three kinds of people, as you know, you've pointed out. Those who can work the problem themselves out, those who work it out with the teacher. So they're a good student, you know. And then the third is neither.
Yeah.
Right. And I think those students he just gives up on. Like he doesn't.
One of the interesting places to be would have been in one of those rooms when Aristotle was studying with Plato, and I suspect asking a lot of questions.
Yes, surely.
Oh, well. Yeah, good. Good start.
Any other questions? Or final, we have about 2 minutes and I don't want to really broach something new. So we could do a recap if you have any questions or thoughts, comments. We can use this time to do that.
I wondered when this written. I understand that Aristotle actually was threatened with trial like Socrates, and he decided to leave because he didn't want Athens to make the mistake again. So was this written before or after? Do you know?
That I don't know, actually.
Just curious.
Sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry. I don't know.
If I recall from reading in the introduction, isn't Nicomachus his son?
Yes.
And I think this was Nicomachus's writing of his dad's work, if I remember right.
You may be right.
Which
So there may be no way to know.
So it wasn't Aristotle himself, it was his son writing about his dad, I think.
Yeah, I think that's what I also got. It's they reference his son, or maybe even his father was the same name. But what's interesting is the lineage. You've got Socrates to Plato to Aristotle, and Aristotle, Alexander the Great, who conquered the world, was Aristotle's student. So I'd be interested. Yeah, was this after was this the supreme good exhibited in Alexander the Great? Here's my student. So
I don't know. I read somewhere recently that he probably didn't have much chance to teach him very much. But the history of his having to leave, he'd had such strong Macedonian connections, and this is when Macedonia is moving and taking over Greece, and suddenly the Athenians don't like outsiders very much anymore, because they could be a threat. So he left before any real issues came up. But he's not going to let Athens be guilty of killing two philosophers.
That's right. He did Athens a favor. Yes. Okay. So I think you'll get to the meaty bits next week with Cindy, when you'll get into happiness and pleasure and the differences between the two. Well, it was great. Thank you very much for your time. And maybe I will see you at some other point.
Thank you.
On your journey in the basic program.
Yeah.
Right.
I hope the online experience brought you over. It's been good. I've done several courses. So.
Okay, good. Very good.
Thank you.
Well, nice to meet you all. Okay, good night.
Appreciate it. Thanks.
Hope to see you again. Good night, folks.
Bye-bye.